Jake Reynolds loved three things: his boat, his dog Max, and ignoring the ridiculous HOA rules in his Florida neighborhood. The first two were easy. The last one, not so much, because his HOA president, Karen Whitmore, had made it her life's mission to personally make him miserable. From the day Jake moved in, Karen had a problem with his boat. First, she left passive-aggressive notes taped to his door. Then came the official warning letters. Then, at every HOA meeting, she pointed to laminated aerial photos of his property, like his boat was a national security threat. "This neighborhood has standards, Mr. Reynolds," she'd say, dramatically waving her papers. "That thing does not belong here." Jake ignored her. The boat stayed, much to Karen's rage, but he never thought she'd actually do something insane. Until that night. Jake was halfway through his first beer on his back porch when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. The voice on the other end? Authoritative? Dead serious? "Jake, where the hell is the boat?" For a second, Jake just stared at the empty dock. Then his stomach dropped. The boat, the FBI's boat, was gone. Jake shot up from his chair so fast he nearly knocked over his beer. Only one person could have done this. "Karen," he muttered, already running to his truck. The man on the phone was Agent Carter. And the more he spoke, the worse the situation got. The boat was federal property. It was equipped with tracking and security systems. If Karen messed with it, alarms would trigger immediately. And if she opened the wrong compartment, Carter didn't even finish his sentence. Jake didn't need him to, because that boat wasn't just a government ride. It was evidence, and Karen had just stolen it. Jake's truck screeched out of the driveway, Max barking in the passenger seat. His mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Karen wasn't just nosy. She was relentless. She once fined an elderly woman for having wind chimes that didn't match the aesthetic. She measured Jake's lawn with a ruler and left a note, saying it was 0.3 inches too tall. If she had stolen the boat, she wasn't just taking it for a spin, she was probably giving herself a full-blown tour of the lake, convinced she was performing a civic duty. Jake gritted his teeth as he reached the marina, and there it was. Jake spotted the boat immediately. A sleek, high-powered government vessel tearing across the water at full speed. And at the helm, Karen, standing tall, arms outstretched, looking like the goddamn captain of the HOA Navy. Her husband, Doug, sat beside her, gripping the seat so tightly his knuckles were white. Even from the dock, Jake could hear Karen's voice echoing over the water. "This is how order is restored, Doug," she shouted, gesturing wildly. "I am protecting our community." Doug looked like he was actively reconsidering his life choices. But Karen's victory lap was about to be very, very short-lived. A loud mechanical screech suddenly rang out across the lake. Then another. Jake watched, stunned, as the boat's lights started flashing red. The engine hiccuped. Then it locked up completely. Karen's voice went from smug to panicked. The boat jerked violently to a stop, nearly throwing her overboard. Then from hidden speakers in the hull, a deep robotic voice boomed across the water. "Unauthorized access detected. Federal vehicle lockdown engaged." Doug let out a sound that was part sob, part terrified squeak. Karen? She did exactly what she shouldn't have done. She started pressing buttons. Alarms blared from inside the boat. Red and blue emergency lights flooded the water. Jake swore under his breath. This wasn't just a lockdown. This was a full-blown security breach. And in the distance, the sound of approaching sirens and helicopters filled the air. Jake leaned against his truck, arms crossed, exhaling slowly. "Oh, Karen," he muttered, shaking his head. "You have no idea what you just did. Karen Whitmore stood at the helm of the FBI's boat, her victory lap around the lake coming to a violent halt. The engine was dead, the alarms were deafening, and flashing red and blue lights had turned the entire waterline into a scene straight out of a crime thriller. Karen's smug expression morphed into confusion, then panic. Doug, her eternally miserable husband, gripped the side of the boat, like he was seconds from passing out. And on the shore, Jake Reynolds stood with his arms crossed, enjoying every single second. The sound of approaching sirens got louder. Jake didn't even need to turn around. He knew exactly what was coming. At least 3 police SUVs barreling toward the marina, one unmarked black car, definitely the feds, and above them, a helicopter, circling like a shark that smelled blood. Doug let out a weak noise. "'Kay, Karen?" Karen frantically pushed buttons on the now completely unresponsive control panel. "What the hell is wrong with this thing?" she snapped. Doug was done. He had seen this coming. He had told Karen not to do it. And now, they were about to get arrested on federal charges. "Karen," Doug croaked, voice shaking, "we need to surrender." Karen snapped her head toward him, horrified. "Surrender!" she shrieked. "Doug, I am the president of this HOA. I am restoring order." Doug wiped a hand down his face. "You stole a federal boat, Karen. I confiscated it," she shot back. Doug looked like he wanted to jump overboard and swim away. On the shore, Jake pulled out his phone and casually started filming. Because this was going on the neighborhood Facebook page. Karen, still in denial, stood stiffly as the first police boat pulled up beside her. 2 uniformed officers, one very unimpressed FBI agent. The agent, a tall man with steel-gray hair, lifted a megaphone. "Step away from the controls. Hands where we can see them." Karen huffed dramatically, lifting her hands like she was being arrested for standing on her own lawn. "This is completely unnecessary," she said in her best Karen voice. The FBI agent ignored her. His sharp eyes scanned the boat, noting the security lockdown. Then he turned toward the dock. His gaze landed on Jake. "You Reynolds?" he called out. Jake grinned. "The one and only." The agent sighed deeply, rubbing his temple. "Well," he muttered, "this just ruined my whole night." The officers helped Doug off the boat first. The man nearly collapsed, muttering apologies under his breath. Karen, however, she stood her ground like she was about to negotiate a peace treaty. "Listen," she began, raising a perfectly manicured finger. "I understand why you might be confused, but let me explain." "No." The FBI agent cut her off. Karen blinked. "Excuse me." The agent motioned to the boat. "This vessel is federal property. That means the second you set foot on it, you committed a crime." Karen laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "I didn't steal it. I was simply relocating it for the good of the community." The agent's patience was gone. "Ma'am," he said flatly, "you triggered a federal security breach." Karen froze. "A what?" Jake snorted. "Yeah, Karen, a federal security breach." The agent folded his arms. "This boat isn't just government property. It was part of an active FBI investigation." Karen's face drained of color. Doug, still shaking, turned to the officers with both hands up. "I had nothing to do with this," he practically shouted. "She made me come. She stole it." Karen whipped around. "Doug, what are you doing?" Doug pointed at her, visibly sweating. "She said she was doing it for the neighborhood," he blurted. "Said she'd teach Reynolds a lesson." Jake choked on a laugh. "Oh, this is beautiful," he muttered. The FBI agent exhaled sharply. "That's enough," he said. "Turn around." Karen let out a choked gasp as the agent pulled out a set of handcuffs. "Wait, what? No, no, no! This is a misunderstanding!" she protested. "I am the president of this HOA! I have rights!" The agent snapped the cuffs on her wrists. "Yeah?" he muttered. "Well, now you have the right to remain silent." Jake grinned ear to ear. This was the greatest day of his life. Karen Whitmore, self-proclaimed ruler of the HOA, had spent years controlling her neighborhood. She fined people for leaving their trash bins out too long. She banned unapproved holiday decorations. She even tried to regulate lawn chair colors. But now she was sitting in the back of an FBI vehicle, handcuffed with her husband Doug, glaring at her like he had just realized he married a lunatic. And Jake Reynolds? He was standing on the dock, arms crossed, smiling like Christmas came early. As the FBI agents and police officers secured the area, Karen tried one last trick: negotiation. She turned toward Agent Carter, the man leading the investigation. "Agent," she said, forcing a polite smile, "there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I was merely acting in the best interest of the community." Carter stared at her. "You stole a federal boat," Karen gasped dramatically. "Stole? No, no, no. I confiscated it. There's a difference." Doug, still shaking beside her, muttered, "Karen, stop talking." She ignored him. "Now I understand why you might be upset," Karen continued, using her best "let me speak to your manager" voice. "But surely, a woman of my status—" Carter held up a hand. "Ma'am, let me stop you right there." Karen's mouth snapped shut. Carter sighed, pulling out his notebook. "You're facing at least 3 serious charges." Karen blinked rapidly. "Charges?" "Grand theft because you stole the boat. Interfering with a federal investigation because that boat was active evidence. And triggering a security breach, which, just so you know, put you on a government watch list." Doug let out a tiny whimper. "Karen?" She sat frozen. "A watch list," she whispered. Carter nodded grimly. "Ever heard of no-fly lists?" Karen let out a high-pitched wheeze. Doug buried his face in his hands. Jake? Jake was loving every second. As the reality of federal charges settled in, Doug completely unraveled. "I told you, Karen," he exploded. "I told you not to do this, but no, you had to teach Reynolds a lesson. You had to be a lunatic." Karen turned to him, offended. "Doug, calm yourself. This is just a temporary setback." "Temporary?" Doug threw up his hands. "Karen, we're about to be in federal court." Jake had to bite his lip to keep from laughing. Doug wasn't done. "You know what? I'm done." He turned to Agent Carter, full panic mode activated. "Sir, I would like to cooperate fully. Anything you need. I will testify against my wife." Karen's head whipped around so fast she nearly pulled a muscle. "Doug! You traitor!" Doug shrugged helplessly. "I'm not going to prison for you, Karen." Carter sighed again. "All right, separate them." As Karen was escorted toward a separate vehicle, she locked eyes with Jake. Her face was flushed with rage. "This isn't over, Reynolds," she hissed. "Jake?" He grinned. "Oh, it absolutely is," he said. Then he pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. A second later, Karen's own voice filled the air. "I am restoring order, Doug. I confiscated it. I am the president of this HOA." Karen's mouth dropped open. You recorded me?" Jake shrugged. "Oh, yeah," he said. "And guess where I just posted it?" Karen's stomach dropped. Doug, still handcuffed, burst out laughing. Jake smirked. "I'm thinking about titling it Karen's Final HOA Meeting." Karen screamed in frustration. But it didn't matter, because by the time she got out of jail, The entire neighborhood, hell, maybe the entire state, would have seen her downfall. Karen Whitmore had spent years ruling the neighborhood with an iron fist. She issued petty fines for lawn decorations. She spied on residents from her porch. She once measured a neighbor's fence with a ruler just to write them up. But now, she was handcuffed in the back of an FBI vehicle while her husband Doug laughed hysterically at her downfall. And Jake Reynolds, he had just uploaded her greatest failure to the HOA Facebook group. Jake barely had time to refresh his phone before the comments started pouring in. Oh my God, did Karen just say she was restoring order like some evil dictator? Not her saying she confiscated a boat she stole. Lamau, this woman got herself on a government watch list. Jake grinned. Within minutes, Karen's meltdown had spread like wildfire. The local news station picked it up. A neighbor made a meme out of her screaming face. Someone edited the video with dramatic music and slow-motion effects. And the best part? The HOA members, the people Karen had tormented for years, were celebrating her downfall like it was a national holiday. Inside the FBI car, Karen was frantically trying to argue with the agents. "You don't understand," she shrieked. "This is all a big misunderstanding." Agent Carter barely looked at her. "You stole a federal boat. I was protecting the community." Doug let out a wheezy, uncontrollable laugh from the other vehicle. Karen turned toward him, her eyes wild. "Doug, stop laughing." Doug wiped tears from his face. "Karen, you just ruined your whole life. Because of a boat." Karen let out an inhuman screech. By the time Karen was officially booked, the HOA board had already gathered in the community clubhouse. Without her, half of them had seen the video. The other half were watching it on loop. The vice president, Nancy, cleared her throat. "Well," she said, adjusting her glasses, "I think we can all agree that Karen is no longer fit to lead." Murmurs of agreement spread through the room. "She put us all in danger," someone said. "She embarrassed the entire neighborhood. She called herself the President of Order. Who even does that?" Nancy straightened her posture. "I motion to impeach Karen Whitmore as HOA president, effective immediately." "Second!" someone shouted before she even finished. And just like that, Karen was officially removed from power. The HOA was now under new leadership, and the first order of business, a petition to eliminate half the ridiculous rules Karen had created. Jake leaned against the clubhouse doorway, grinning. This was better than he ever imagined. A few days later, Jake was sitting on his dock with a beer in hand, watching Max chase a seagull, when a black government SUV pulled up. To his house, Agent Carter stepped out. Jake raised an eyebrow. "You back for the boat?" Carter smirked. "Nah, we got it secured." Then he handed Jake a folder. Jake flipped it open and nearly dropped his beer. It was a check, a very large check. Carter shrugged. "Since you cooperated and helped us recover the vessel, the agency agreed on let's call it an inconvenience payout." Jake let out a slow whistle. "This is enough to buy a brand new boat." Carter grinned. "Good thing Karen's not around to complain about it anymore." Jake laughed. "Oh, man," he said, shaking his head. "She's going to lose her mind when she gets out and sees this." Carter smirked. "That's not for a while. Turns out, interfering with a federal investigation isn't something judges take lightly." Jake choked on his beer. "You're telling me—" Carter nodded. "Oh, yeah. Karen's going to be sitting tight for a long time." Jake leaned back, arms behind his head, and let out a content sigh. For the first time in years, the neighborhood was finally at peace. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. Don't forget to tap the bell icon to stay updated. Your support means the world.